The orc woman looked exhausted after days of walking, but her eyes carried an uncommon determination, and when she revealed why she had crossed the entire frontier and made her request, John was left completely speechless. The woman appeared on the copper trail like something the desert had swallowed whole and then decided to return. John Wilson saw her from the corral. He had been repairing the second fence post since dawn, and the sun was already punishing. He straightened, wiped his forearm across his brow, and squinted toward the road. A figure, alone, moving slowly. He watched for a long moment before he could tell anything useful. The walk was tired but deliberate, not stumbling, not lost, someone who knew exactly where they were going and had simply been walking there for too long. He set the hammer down. John was 32 years old and had spent the last 18 months running Willow Creek on his own. His father, Elias Wilson, had died quietly in the spring of the previous year, leaving behind a ranch, a reputation, and a silence that no amount of work could fill. John had tried. He rose before the sun every morning. He mended fences, he broke horses. He traded fairly and listened carefully, the way his father had taught him. People along the frontier said Elias Wilson had known everyone worth knowing from Stone Ridge to the edge of the high mesa. Some of them had started to say the same about his son. John didn't think he had earned that yet. He was still learning what his father had built. The figure came closer. He could see now that it was a woman, young. Her clothes were the color of the road itself, heavy with dust from what looked like days of travel. Her boots left deep prints in the dry earth. She carried a pack on her back that had been cinched tight, as if the weight inside had shifted and been adjusted 100 times. Then the distance closed enough for him to see clearly. She was an orc, or close to it. Her skin was a soft, deep green, the shade of river moss in late summer, and it caught the morning light in a way that made him stop thinking about the fence entirely. Her ears came to a slight point, delicate and precise. Her dark hair was long, pulled into a loose braid that had mostly come apart during the journey. Strands fell across her face, and she didn't bother brushing them away. She was beautiful, exhausted, covered in road dust, and unmistakably beautiful. John stayed where he was and waited. She stopped at the property line, not 10 feet from the gate. She looked at him with eyes that were green hazel and steady, and what he saw in them was not what he expected. He expected wariness, the kind of look that half-orcs and orcs wore in this part of the frontier, especially when approaching a human ranch alone. He had seen that look on traders, on drifters, on families passing through after the border disputes had pushed them east. This woman did not look afraid. She looked like she had made a decision a long time ago and had spent every day since then walking toward it. "I'm sorry to trouble you," she said. Her voice was low and careful, respectful in the way of someone raised to be polite even when they were running on nothing. "I was told this is the Wilson Ranch." "It is," John said. She held his gaze. The wind moved between them, pulling dust off the road in slow, lazy spirals. "My name is Linnea Thornshield," she said. "I've come from Green Hollow. I've been traveling for months." She paused, a breath, not from nerves, from the weight of what came next. "I was told you might be the only person left on this frontier who can help me find someone." John studied her face. The exhaustion was real. So was the determination underneath it. He had never seen her before in his life, and yet he could not bring himself to tell her to move on. He did not answer right away. That was something his father had taught him, not with words, but by example. Elias Wilson had never been a man who rushed a response. He believed that the space between a question and an answer was where the truth lived, and that most people ruined it by filling it too fast. John stood at the gate and looked at Linnea Thornshield, and she let him look. She did not shift her weight or repeat herself. She simply waited, and that patience told him something about who she was. "You said someone directed you here," he said. "Many people," she said, "over the course of months. I asked about Elias Wilson first. His name came up everywhere I went between here and Green Hollow. People said he was the most connected man on the frontier, that he knew every trader, every rancher, every family from the mesa to the river." She paused. "Then I learned he had passed, and those same people said his son had inherited a fair share of those connections." John felt the familiar ache that came whenever his father's name landed in a conversation. It never warned him. It just arrived, settling behind his ribs like something heavy placed gently down. "I don't know that I've earned that description," he said. "I'm not looking for a legend," she said. "I'm looking for someone who might remember a name." He opened the gate. He didn't say, "Come in." He didn't offer an explanation. He simply moved aside, and she understood the gesture, and she walked through. He led her past the corral and toward the old stable at the far edge of the main yard. The horses watched them from behind the fence with mild curiosity. Up close, he could see the full measure of the journey she had made. Her boots were cracked along the sides, the leather worn through in patches. Her hands, when she adjusted the pack strap, showed the kind of calluses that came from years of work, not just months of walking. She was tall, nearly his height, and she moved with a steadiness that seemed physical and something else at the same time, like someone who had learned to carry invisible weights so long it had become part of her posture. He prepared a space in the stable. A clean straw mat, 2 blankets, a lantern hung on the post. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than I've had," she said. And she meant it. He could hear that she meant it. Later, when the afternoon had bled into early evening, and the temperature had dropped the way it always did in the desert once the sun gave up, John brought food: bread, hard cheese, a tin bowl of bean stew that had been simmering since noon. He set it on the small crate beside her mat and sat on the opposite side of the stable door, not quite inside, not quite out, giving her space while remaining near enough to talk. She ate with the focused gratitude of someone who had been measuring their meals for a long time. "Tell me about the name," he said. She looked up. "Torrin," she said. "Torrin Thornshield. He's my father. He disappeared when I was 5 years old." She held the bowl in both hands, not eating now, just holding it. "I've been looking for the truth about what happened to him for most of my life. Every lead I've followed has ended in silence or a dead end, but I kept moving." She looked at the lantern flame. "My mother believed he was trying to come back. She believed that until the day she died." The name sat in the air between them. Torrin. John turned it over quietly in the back of his mind. It did not open anything immediately, but it did not feel entirely empty either. It sat there like a stone with something underneath it that he could not quite lift. "I don't know the name," he said honestly, "not off the top of my head." She nodded, not surprised, not crushed. "I didn't expect you to. I just hoped that somewhere in everything your father knew, there might be a thread." "What kind of orc was he?" John asked, then realized the question might sound wrong. "I mean, what did he do? For work?" Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, something quieter. "He helped people," she said. "That's what my mother always said. He helped people, and he kept moving, and one day he went too far and didn't come back." John stayed until the first stars appeared. When he walked back to the house, the name was still with him. Torrin Thornshield. Somewhere, in some fold of memory he couldn't reach yet, something was stirring. Sleep didn't come easily. John lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling and let his mind wander the way it sometimes did when a problem wouldn't let him rest. The ranch was quiet. The desert outside made its small sounds, insects and wind and the occasional far-off call of something he couldn't name. Sounds that usually put him to sleep without effort. Not tonight. He kept returning to the name. Torren. He had heard it before. He was nearly certain of it, but certainty was a strange thing at the edge of memory. The closer he reached for it, the further it seemed to drift. And then, somewhere between the second and third hour, something surfaced. He was 16. Stone Ridge, during the autumn fair. The kind of event his father had loved, where half the frontier seemed to compress itself into two narrow streets, and everyone knew everyone, and deals were made over handshakes and shared meals. He had been following his father through the crowd, bored the way teenagers are bored at things their parents find important. His father had stopped to talk to a man, an older man, white-haired, slow-moving, with the kind of face that had been shaped by decades of sun and wind. They had spoken in low voices, while John stood nearby, half listening. He couldn't remember the full conversation, but one sentence had caught his attention, even then. He hadn't known why. He had just noticed it, the way you notice a word you've never heard before. "I still have the bag that Orc gave me, the one who saved my life. Haven't been able to let go of it." John sat up in bed. He still couldn't remember the man's name, but he could picture the face now, the white beard, the pale blue eyes, the slow, careful way he moved through a crowd. He had been one of his father's oldest friends. He had been there at several fairs over the years. His father had always greeted him warmly and spent more time with him than with most others. The name was close. He could almost feel it. He lay back down and let it come at its own pace. In the morning, the name was still not there. But John was awake before the roosters, already turning over the memory while he fed the horses and checked the trough. Linnea was awake too. He found her near the stable entrance, watching the sky go pale in the east. She had combed her hair and retied the braid. In the clear morning light, without the dust and exhaustion distorting everything, she looked different, younger somehow, and there was something in her expression that he recognized without being able to name it. The look of someone who had been alone with their own thoughts for so long that the thoughts had started to feel like company. He knew that look. He had worn it for 18 months. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Better than I have in weeks," she said. She glanced at the corral. "You're missing one." He turned. She was right. The black gelding was gone. The latch on the gate was hanging loose. He crossed the yard in long strides, checking the ground around the post. The track was clear. The horse had drifted north, toward the rocky slopes that rose behind the property. "I'll find him," he said. "I'll come," she said. "You don't have to." She was already moving toward the open gate. "You helped me without obligation," she said simply. "Let me do the same." He watched her for a moment and then followed. They tracked the gelding into the rocky terrain north of the ranch. She was good at it, better than he expected. She moved quietly and noticed details without being told to look for them. A broken branch, the way the dust had been disturbed, a partial print where the horse had paused to investigate a clump of dry brush. "You've done this before," he said. "I've been tracking things my whole life," she said, without looking back. They found the gelding wedged between two large boulders where the slope flattened into a shallow draw. He was unhurt but nervous, ears flat, rolling his eyes at the narrow space he had walked into. Linnea approached him from the side, slow and steady, making soft sounds that weren't quite words. The horse stilled. She put her hand on his neck, and he dropped his head. John watched her lead the animal out of the rocks and felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with relief about the horse. On the walk back, neither of them spoke much. But the silence was a different kind than the one that had separated them the night before. It was easier, shared. The morning was already building its heat when they came through the gate. The days began to stack. That was the thing John hadn't expected. He had assumed Linnea would stay one night, maybe two, and then move on toward whatever the next lead pointed. Instead, the search for Torrin had stalled into something that required patience, and patience required a place to be patient in. She stayed. And the ranch, which had felt too large for one person since Elias died, began to feel the right size again. She worked without being asked. That was the first thing he noticed. She did not wait for direction. She saw what needed doing and she did it. She mended a section of fence that had been on his list for 2 weeks. She reorganized the grain storage in a way that made more sense than what he had inherited. When he slaughtered a chicken for dinner, she cleaned and prepared it without comment, with the efficiency of someone who had fed herself for a long time. He started giving her small responsibilities, then larger ones. Within a week, without either of them naming it, she had a place in the rhythm of the ranch. In the evenings they talked. She told him about Green Hollow, the orc settlement where she had grown up. It was small, she said, beautiful in the way that hard places sometimes were. The people there were proud and careful and had learned to build their lives in the margins that the border disputes had left them. Her mother, Maeve, had been human, and that had made Linnea something between two worlds her whole life. Too soft-featured for some of the older orcs, too marked for most of the humans who passed through. "Did it bother you?" he asked one evening, sitting near the well in the cooling air. "When I was young," she said. "Later I stopped caring what I looked like to other people. My mother never made me feel strange. And my father, from what she told me, never saw it either." She looked at her hands. He used to say that the best things in the world were made from more than one thing. John said nothing. He was watching the way the last light touched the mesa in the distance, turning it from red to purple. "What was he like?" he asked. "From what she told you." She was quiet for a moment. "Big," she said, and something in her voice was almost fond. "Very big. 2 meters, and then some. Dark green, not like me. He was full orc. But my mother always said that the size of him was the least remarkable thing about him. She said he had a way of making people feel seen, even strangers, even people who were frightened of him at first." "That's a rare thing," John said. "She never stopped believing he was trying to get back to us," Linnea said. Her voice went quieter. "Even at the end, even after 20 years. She stopped. He could see her jaw tighten. She was holding something in. "What's the part you're most afraid of?" he asked carefully. "About finding the truth." She looked at him. The question had surprised her. Most people didn't ask that. Most people asked about the search itself, the logistics, the leads, not the fear underneath them. "That he left on purpose," she said. The words were flat and precise. The way words sound when someone has thought them so many times they've lost their softness. That there was a moment when he decided that whatever was out there was more important than coming home. And that my mother spent the rest of her life waiting for a man who had already chosen something else. The desert held that statement for a moment. "I don't believe that," John said. "You didn't know him?" "No," he said, "but I know what my father used to say about people who helped strangers. He said the ones who did it out of habit were the ones who understood something that most people didn't, that you couldn't build a life worth anything without other people inside it." He paused. "A man who understood, that doesn't leave his family." Linnea looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at the mesa. She didn't argue, but he could see that she had kept his words. The storm came without much warning. There had been signs, the way there always were for anyone who knew how to read the desert. The light had changed in the early afternoon, going from sharp gold to something flatter and stranger. The horses had been restless since noon. The air smelled like iron. John had been watching it build on the western horizon, a brown wall rising slowly behind the hills, still far enough away that a person who wasn't paying attention might miss it. He was paying attention. "We need to move the horses to the covered pen," he said, "and secure the grain door. The latch broke last week and I haven't replaced it." Linnea was already on her feet. She didn't ask how bad, she didn't ask how long. She looked at the horizon once, assessed, and started moving. They worked for 2 hours without stopping. John brought the horses in, while Linnea reinforced the side gate with the spare chain he kept coiled behind the tool shed. She had to improvise twice when the hardware didn't cooperate, and both times she found a solution without interrupting him to ask. He noticed this. He noticed the way she moved through problems, like they were terrain, not obstacles. The wind hit before they finished. It came with a sound like a long, low note played on something enormous and far away, and then it was just everywhere, filling everything, turning the air brown and opaque. John felt it push against him and leaned into it and kept working. He could barely see the fence line. He could barely see his own hands. He could hear her, though, somewhere to his left, still moving, still working, not calling out for direction. They met at the stable door as the worst of it arrived. He pulled it shut behind them and dropped the bar across. Outside, the storm pressed against the wood. The horses were uneasy, but contained. The lantern swung on its hook, throwing the space in and out of shadow. They both stood there for a moment, breathing. Linnea had dust in her hair and across her face, a thin cut on her palm from the chain, not deep, but bleeding. She looked at it briefly, and then looked at him. "The grain door?" she said. "Secured," he said. "Fence held. Lost a section of the small corral, but I can fix it tomorrow." She nodded. Then she sat down against the stable wall, and he sat down a few feet away, and they listened to the storm work itself out against the boards. An hour passed, maybe more. He said, "I remembered something last night." She turned her head. "That conversation I mentioned, the one from the Stone Ridge Fair. I think I remembered who the man was." He paused, reaching for it again the way he had been reaching all day. "My father called him Garrick Hale. He was a merchant, older. He lived somewhere in Stone Ridge, or he did at the time. My father had known him for years." The change in her was immediate, not dramatic, nothing she would have shown to a stranger. But he was watching her closely enough now to see it. Her shoulders came forward slightly, her hands resting on her knees, pressed down a little harder. "The man who said he still had the bag," she said. "Yes. From the orc who saved his life. Yes." The storm continued. Outside, the world had disappeared. "Do you think he's still in Stone Ridge?" she asked. "I don't know," John said honestly. "He was old when my father knew him. That was 15 years ago." He paused. "But if he's still there, someone will know where to find him." Linnea pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling. He could see her calculating, running over it in her mind the way she had probably run over every other lead, testing it for weight, trying to decide how much hope it was safe to carry. "We can go," he said. "I have animals to sell and supplies to buy. Stone Ridge makes sense. I go twice a year anyway." She looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. The storm pushed once more against the stable door and then began to quiet. By the time it passed, they had made a plan. They left before sunrise. John loaded the wagon the night before. 3 horses to sell, including the black gelding they had tracked down from the rocky slopes days earlier, healthy enough now to fetch a fair price. Some preserved goods, too, and the list of supplies the ranch needed. He had made this trip enough times that the preparation was almost automatic. But this time there was something different in the air while he worked, a kind of charge that had nothing to do with the storm's aftermath, and everything to do with what the trip might mean. He didn't say that. He just loaded the wagon. Linnea was ready when he came to tell her they were leaving. She had her pack in order and her hair braided back neatly. She looked different in the early morning dark, more contained, as if she had gathered herself in the night and tucked everything careful. The copper trail opened up as dawn broke behind them. It was a long road, and they rode mostly in silence for the first hour, which was easy, not the strained kind. The kind that meant both people were in their own heads for reasons they both understood. John watched the landscape as it shifted from the flat grassland around Willow Creek into the longer, more broken terrain that led towards Stone Ridge. He knew every mile of this road, every dry wash and low ridge. He had ridden it behind his father a dozen times before he ever rode it alone. He thought about Elias. He thought about the way his father had always known what to say to strangers, how he could draw a person's story out in 10 minutes, not through clever questions, but through something simpler. Attention. His father had paid attention to people in a way that made them feel they were the only thing in the world worth looking at. John had never felt like he had that gift. Beside him, Linnea was watching the road too. He could see her eyes moving to every figure they passed, every covered wagon pulling off toward the hills, every lone rider crossing the trail at a distance. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Habit," she said. "When you've been traveling long enough, you never really stop scanning. You're always looking for the next thing that might tell you something." "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Following a trail for that long?" She thought about it. "Like reading a book where someone tore out every third page," she said. "You understand enough to keep going, but never enough to stop." Stone Ridge appeared ahead of them in the late morning, its low buildings rising out of the dust of the main road. John guided the horses through the outer streets, which were busy with early market traffic. Merchants calling from open stalls, farmers moving slow wagons piled with harvest, children underfoot. He found the corral where he usually sold his horses and handled his business. Linnea stayed close, and when a disagreement arose over the price of the gelding, she said something quiet to the buyer that John didn't fully catch, but which resolved the matter in less than a minute. He looked at her afterward. She shrugged. "He was trying to take advantage," she said. "I know," he said. "I just usually let it happen rather than argue." "You shouldn't," she said simply. They spent the late morning asking about Garrick Hale. The first 3 people they asked drew blanks or gave contradictory answers. The fourth, an elderly woman selling dried herbs near the church, nodded immediately when she heard the name. "Old Garrick," she said. "Lives at the edge of the North Quarter now. He doesn't come into town much anymore. His legs have gone bad." She looked at them both. "You family of his?" "Friends," John said. She gave them directions. They followed them past the main market, past the stables, past the last permanent building, and out to a small, low house at the edge of where the town decided to stop trying. The door was open. An old man sat just inside the threshold in a wooden chair, his white beard long and his blue eyes clear, looking out at the road as though he had been expecting someone for a very long time. He looked at John first, then at Linnea. Something moved across his face that John could not name. Garrick Hale was 82 years old and looked every year of it. His hands were spotted and slow, and his back had curved forward with the weight of decades. But when John said his name and introduced himself as Elias Wilson's son, the old man's eyes sharpened immediately, the way old eyes sometimes did when something genuinely mattered. "Elias's boy," Garrick said. His voice was thin but steady. "I heard he passed. I'm sorry for it. He was one of the good ones." "He was," John said. Garrick's gaze moved to Linnea. He studied her the way someone studied a face they were trying to place. Not rudely, carefully. "This is Linnea Thornshield," John said. The old man went still. Not the stillness of age, when the body simply slows. Something different. A deeper stillness that came from a name landing somewhere unexpected and enormous. "Thornshield," Garrick said. "Yes," Linnea said. Her voice was controlled. She had prepared herself for this, or tried to. "I'm looking for my father, Torrin Thornshield. He disappeared more than 20 years ago. I was told you might have known him." Garrick looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Come inside." The house was small and warm, and organized in the way of someone who had been alone long enough to arrange everything within reach. He moved slowly toward 3 chairs near the window and lowered himself into the largest one with the careful concentration of someone navigating a narrow road. "How is your mother?" he asked. Linnea's breath caught. The question was already more than she had hoped for. He knew who Maeve was. "She passed," Linnea said. 3 years ago, she never stopped believing my father was trying to come home." Garrick closed his eyes briefly, his hands on his knees curled slightly inward. "She was right to believe that," he said. The room became very quiet. "You knew him," Linnea said, not a question. "I knew him," Garrick said. "I knew him well enough that when I think about the man I owe my life to, his face is the one I see." He began slowly. He had been a merchant, he said, young and ambitious and foolish about the risks of the road in those days. He had been part of a large caravan, one of the last mixed caravans before the border laws tightened. Humans and orcs and half-orcs all traveling together because it made financial sense, and because some of them, back then, actually believed the peace would hold. Torrin had been one of 3 orc men traveling with a small group from the river settlements. "Big," Garrick said. "Enormous. Bigger than most, even for full orcs, but quiet in the way that truly large people sometimes were, as if they had learned early that their size said enough without adding words to it." "He helped everyone," Garrick said. "That was the thing you noticed first. Someone's wheel broke, he fixed it. Someone's animal went lame, he carried the load. He didn't make a ceremony of it, he just did it." Linnea sat very still. "The ambush came on the 3rd day," Garrick said. "A narrow pass between 2 rock faces. They had been watching the caravan from the hills. There were too many of them. We couldn't have fought our way through, not with women and children in the group. We couldn't all run." He paused. "Someone had to stop them long enough for the rest to get clear." He looked at Linnea directly. "Your father was the one who understood that first," he said. "And he was the one who chose to do something about it." Linnea's hands were flat on her thighs, her face was perfectly still, and her eyes were very bright. "Before he went," Garrick said, "he gave me his leather bag. He said, 'Keep this if I don't come back.' And those were his exact words." The old man's voice wavered slightly. "I told him I would." John watched Linnea absorb this. He watched the thing she had been holding for 23 years begin to shift. "He didn't abandon you," Garrick said very gently. "That is the one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty. He spoke of your mother and of you throughout the entire journey. He said your name." The old man's voice broke slightly on the last word. He paused, collected himself. He said your name like it was something he needed to get back to. The bag was small and dark with age. Garrick had retrieved it from the back of the house, moving slowly and returning slowly, holding it in both hands with the particular care of someone carrying something that does not belong to them and never did. He set it on the table in front of Linnea. She looked at it for a long moment before she touched it. John stayed quiet. He had understood, without needing to think about it, that this moment was not his. He was a witness here. That was the right thing to be. When she finally picked it up, she held it with both hands, the way Garrick had held it. The leather had gone dark and soft with decades, worn smooth at the corners. The stitching was hand-done, tight and careful. Someone had made this with patience. Inside, 3 things: a pencil, short and worn, the eraser long gone, a small folding knife with a cracked wooden handle, and a notebook, small, thick, The cover warped from years of humidity and dryness alternating, the pages swollen at the edges. Linnea set the pencil and the knife on the table. She held the notebook. He could write, Garrick said quietly. He had taught himself. He was proud of it. Though he didn't say so directly, you could tell by the way he held a pen. She opened the notebook. John watched her face change. The first pages were small things, notes about the road, weather observations, distances between settlements, the kind of information a careful traveler collected out of habit. But even in those early pages, there was something else, a sentence here, a sentence there. That was not information, but something else entirely. Crossed the hollow fork today. Reminded me of the stream behind the house where Em used to wash her hair in the mornings. Good weather, thinking about home. Met a family from the East settlements. They had a small daughter with dark hair. She reminded me so much of Elle that I had to stop walking for a minute. Linnea's hands were completely still. She turned pages slowly. The further into the notebook she went, the more the travel notes fell away, and the more the other voice emerged. Not the voice of a man recording information, the voice of a man talking to people who weren't there. He wrote to Maeve. Long passages describing what he had seen and what he had thought and what he missed. He wrote about the smell of her hair and the sound of her laugh and the way she hummed when she was thinking about something else entirely. He wrote to Linnea. John could see from where he sat the way the pages filled with her name. Again and again. L. The small letter that stood in for everything. L must be walking properly now. Running, probably. I wonder if she's talking yet in full sentences. Her mother always said she would be a talker. I keep thinking about Elle's face when she used to wake up from sleep, that look of absolute confusion before she remembered where she was. It made me laugh every time. I want to see that face again. Linnea pressed her lips together. It was the last pages that broke something loose. Near the end, Torrin had written in larger letters, as if he wanted to be absolutely clear, as if he was writing for an audience he couldn't see yet. I'm coming home, whatever it takes. I need to see them again. I need to show Em I'm still here. I need to show Elle who I am so she'll know I chose them. Every day I have chosen them. Every day I will choose them. Linnea set the notebook down on the table. She covered her face with her hands. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of her breathing, which was slow and careful, and then not careful at all. And then she was crying in the way that people cried when something that had been pressed down for a very long time finally found the surface. Not soft, not graceful, real. Garrick said nothing. He sat with his hands on his knees and let her. John sat in his chair and let her, and she cried until she was finished, and then she lifted her face, and her eyes were swollen, and her cheeks were wet, and there was an expression on her face that he had never seen on anyone before. Not grief exactly. Something older than grief. Something that came after grief, when the long waiting was over and the truth arrived, and it turned out the truth was a kind one. She picked up the notebook and held it against her chest. "Thank you," she said to Garrick. He nodded slowly. His own eyes were wet. "I've been waiting a long time for someone to come for this," he said. "Longer than I expected, but not longer than I was willing to wait." The road back to Willow Creek was the same road, same dust, same light, same flat distances stretching out on either side of the wagon as the afternoon moved toward evening. But Linnea was different on it. She sat beside John on the bench, with the notebook held loosely in her lap, and she did not scan the road the way she had on the journey out. She was not looking for the next thing. She was reading, slowly, not missing anything, going back to certain passages and staying there, the way you stayed in a place you didn't want to leave. John let her read. He guided the horses home and thought about his father and thought about the way some people spent their lives not knowing that they were already exactly where they were meant to be. They arrived at Willow Creek as the last light was leaving the sky. He unhitched the horses and led them to the trough while Linnea carried the supplies inside. By the time he came into the yard, the lanterns were already lit in the kitchen window, and the smell of something warm reached him before he got to the door. She had started dinner. He stood outside for a moment and let that land. After dinner, she sat on the step outside the stable in the dark, the notebook open across her knees. The stars were sharp and close, the way desert stars were in the hour after the air went fully cold. He brought 2 cups of coffee and sat on the step beside her, and she did not move away from the warmth of him, and he did not move away from hers. "The last entry," she said, without looking up. "What does it say?" She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and low and careful. "He writes about coming home, about building a porch. He says he wants to watch the sun set from their front yard. He says he had been away long enough to understand that everywhere else in the world was just the distance between him and them." John looked out at the dark shapes of the hills. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," he said. "He does," she said, and then, softer, "I wish I had." The fire beetles had come out in the dry grass beyond the fence, their small lights rising and falling. The horses breathed steadily in the stable behind them. Somewhere distant, a coyote spoke once to the dark and went quiet. Linnea closed the notebook. She held it against her chest the same way she had in Garrick's house, not as though she were hiding it, but as though she were keeping it close the way you kept close the things you had been looking for the longest. John watched her do this and said nothing. After a while she said, "I don't have anywhere to go back to. Green Hollow was my mother's. After she passed, I let it go. I've been on the road ever since." She paused. "I told myself it was because of the search, but I think mostly I just didn't know what to stop for." He let that exist for a moment. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked. She looked at the notebook in her arms. Then she looked at the ranch, the dark yard, the familiar shapes of the corral and the stable, and the house with its lit windows, the horses she had come to know by name, the fence she had mended, the trails she had walked beside him into the red hills. "My father spent his whole life," she said slowly, "writing to people he couldn't reach, saying I'm still here, saying I'm coming back, saying the place where you are is the only place I want to be." She exhaled. "I read it and I thought I understood what he meant, and then I looked up." She looked up. "And I think I understand what home means now," she said. "Not the place you came from, the place you can't walk away from." John didn't speak. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were clear and honest and carrying none of the guarded distance she had worn when she first appeared at his gate. "I'd like to stay," she said. It was simple. It was enough. He nodded once. The way he nodded when something important had been said and no additional words were needed. The fire beetles continued their slow, quiet work in the grass. The coffee cooled in the cups. The notebook rested in her arms, and the stars held still above Willow Creek, and the desert was at peace. They sat there a long time in the dark, the two of them, with no need to speak and no reason to move. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of them was alone. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-Bound Legacy.